The Graziadio School of Business and Management at Pepperdine University proudly presents the Dean's Executive Leadership Series. This podcast invites top business practitioners and thought leaders to share their view on the real world of business.
Well, thank you, Mike. It is so much fun to be here in Orange County. We always try to do one or two of these in Orange County. Our next Dells is in Northern California, so we try to make the rounds to sort of all of our major regional locations in Southern California. So it is a pleasure to be here. It's also a pleasure to be at the Center Club. I had not been here for a while, and they've done a lovely remodel. It's a beautiful venue and a great place to do this, so we're glad to partner with them on this particular event. I do want to introduce a few people in the room before I do an update on the school and remind you of some other upcoming events. Aaron Young is here. He is the president of our Graziadio Alumni Network chapter here in Orange County. So Aaron, it's good to have you here. We so appreciate our alumni leaders and all of our GAN chapters, and it takes a lot of extra time and energy, but we appreciate it. It helps us so much with what we're doing. One of the upcoming events we have on April 12th is our George Awards, where we give awards to students and alumni who really exemplify the values of the school and the entrepreneurial spirit of George Graziadio, for whom the school is named. And we actually have two of this year's award recipients in the audience, so I'm going to have them stand up so you can see them. Demos Vardiabasis is going to be awarded the faculty award this year. Demos, is he still around, or did he? There he, you're in the glare of the light. There we go. So we're glad to honor Demos. And then we give an alumni award each year, and Danny's son, who is a member of our Board of Visitors, an alumnus, is here and going to be honored. So Danny, stand up so everybody can see you. There you are, you're right in front. And our speaker tonight is actually a former George Award recipient. So you guys are in the presence of really important people here this evening. And then finally, Bill McDonald is with us. And Bill is going to actually be our speaker at the George Awards. He knew George Graziadio personally and is going to share some of those experiences. And we're so pleased that he will do that and that he's with us this evening. So Bill, if you would stand up so everyone can see you as well. Thank you. A few upcoming events I want to mention. I did mention the George Awards, but also this week our GAN Orange County chapter is sponsoring an event at Hilton in Costa Mesa called the Icarus Deception, featuring Seth Godin. So we're kind of partnering on that and sponsoring that. So if you're into marketing and want to hear from Seth Godin, you should certainly enjoy that in just a few days down the road. On March 21st, we are hosting an event with our Center for Applied Research, and Danny's son is actually hosting that event here called A Season of Innovation. It's an Orange County spring reception. We have, I think, over 200 people registered. I think we're going to have to cap the registration at 250 given our venue. So we encourage you to be there. We're going to hear from some of our faculty doing some interesting research and talk about the work of our Center for Applied Research. So we'd love to have you with us at that on March 21st. You can learn more about that on our website. And then on April 6th, we have a major university event. We have our Associates Dinner every year that honors those in our family and community that contribute and support the school through our Associates program. And our Hispanic alumni chapter is going to have a scholarship reception prior to the Associates Dinner this year. We'd love to have you join us for that. And then the dinner will feature Tim Tebow as our speaker, and it's going to be at the Beverly Hilton. So if you haven't signed up for that and would like to come, we would love to have you at that. It's a university-wide celebration. It will be a lot of fun. And I mentioned the George Awards on April 12th, and then on April 16th, we will have our next Dean's Executive Leadership Series in Northern California. As I mentioned, I know you probably won't be able to be there physically with us, but I think we'll try to webcast that as well. And it's featuring Jed York, who is the owner and CEO of the San Francisco 49ers. So that will be an interesting event on April 16th. And then one more Orange County event that's a little bit further down the road. On May 2nd, we have a special military recruiting event down here in Orange County at our campus. And we hope that you will encourage folks you know that have military backgrounds to come and be a part of that. We have a wonderful group of alumni that are military. How many of the folks in the room have military backgrounds? I know we have several. So, and I know our speaker, Dan, you'll hear more about that, does as well. So we appreciate that. They are wonderful students in our program. We thank all of you for serving our country the way you have and for entrusting your education with us. So we encourage you to bring friends to that event on May 2nd. Some really exciting things going on in the school. I want to mention 4 very quickly that I'm very proud of, and kind of shows you some of the interesting things that the school is doing. You're probably familiar with our Pepperdine Private Capitals Market Project. We just published the 2013 Small Business Economic Forecast and the Private Capital Markets Access Index. It's a quarterly report we put out. Along with that, we did a study on the flu impact on small businesses, which was quite interesting and got some really good press. And then we've also just published our Market Pulse quarterly survey report. So if you're in that small business space, it's a wonderful project we have going that has really gotten picked up a lot by the media, providing some really good insight and information into that particular space in the business market. So I encourage you to look on our website for that as well. We rolled out a Master of Science in Applied Finance about 4 years ago in Malibu in our full-time programs. We've had such great success with that we are actually launching that program here in Orange County next fall. It's a little bit shorter than our MBA program with a very distinct focus on finance, and we know there's a wonderful kind of finance world down here. So if you know of people that you think that MS degree would be appropriate for, we really encourage you to tell them about our program here in Orange County beginning in the fall. We're excited about that new offering down in this part of our at this campus. And then we're also rolling out a Master of Science in Accounting that will be at the Malibu campus. It's a full-time program in partnership with our undergraduate college at Pepperdine Stever College for folks that need the 150 hours that it's going to take now to sit for the CPA exam. So it's really the first pure partnership like that at Pepperdine between 2 schools, and we know that's going to be a really excellent program that will expand our offerings in Malibu as well. A couple of recognitions that the school has gotten just really in the last week that I'm very excited to tell you about. We had a group of students from, it was a joint team of law school students and students from our MBA program in Malibu who participated in the Analytics Conference Diamond Dollars Case Competition that's put on by the Society for American Baseball Research. I don't know about you, but I didn't know there was a Society for American Baseball Research till this happened. But this was the second year they've put on a case competition, and the students had to do an analysis of how the Angels could maximize the value of Mike Trout. And so I actually saw the PowerPoint that our students put together. It was really complicated and amazing, and it clearly showed me that our faculty are doing an excellent job of teaching our students how to do analytical research. But we actually won the competition, and I'm proud to say that we beat last year's champion, who came in second, and it was a team from the Booth School of Business at University of Chicago. So we did quite well. We're very proud of those students and how they did. And then finally, we, a few years ago, rolled out a certificate in social, environmental, and ethically responsible business strategy. Right now, it's primarily based on our Malibu campus. That was developed by Dr. Mark Mallinger, our former associate dean in that program, and Dr. Michael Crook, who's now a professor in the business school and the former CEO of Patagonia. And we just learned last week that they are one of the grand prize winners for the Page Award that's awarded to schools who are doing really innovative work in the sustainability space. And we are winners at that with, there were 3 grand prize winners, us, Vanderbilt, and William and Mary. And that's put on by the business school at University of South Carolina. So we're very excited about that. It's really a very prestigious award in that space for curriculum there. So lots of really wonderful things happening at the school. Our faculty and staff and students are really helping to continue to grow and build the reputation of the business school. It's really my pleasure now to kind of introduce our speaker. I'm so excited that we have Dan Sanders with us. Dan, as you know, is an alumnus of the business school. He graduated from our Presidents and Key Executive program a few years ago. As I mentioned, he is actually was a recipient of our George Award several years ago, and he also was one of our first student speakers at graduation. So I promise you he's actually a really good speaker because I've heard him several times and I can vouch for that. But Dan is a seasoned executive in the food industry and supermarket sector. As a super value division president, he led Albertsons in Southern California and Nevada and Acme markets in Pennsylvania during business transformations for both of those organizations. And prior to serving in the publicly traded area, he was the chief executive officer of United Supermarkets, which was an award-winning family-owned retailer based in Texas. and actually did some of their ads on television and everything there, and was a little bit of a West Texas celebrity, I think, when he was there, so you could ask him about that. But he started his career in an entrepreneurial environment at Adplex, which was a marketing company specializing in advertising, production, and business consulting services. Prior to going into the business world, he served as an officer in the United States Air Force, where he piloted the U-2 reconnaissance plane during the first Gulf War, which may actually be the most impressive thing about his very impressive resume. He graduated from Lubbock Christian University prior to going into the Air Force, and is just an outstanding person. He's an author. You have one of his books in front of you. It was a best-selling book, so he wrote Built to Serve, and he's also written a follow-up book to that, Equipped to Lead, so you should also read that. But it is my distinct pleasure to introduce a good friend and one of our alumni that we're quite proud of, Dan Sanders.
Well, thank you very much, Linda. I appreciate that kind introduction. I have learned something, being in the supermarket business, it's a lot more dangerous than flying the U-2, that's for certain. And certainly the next week's announcement regarding the consummation of the deal with Cerberus selling Albertsons was a twist that we hadn't planned for, so my speech has shifted somewhat. But I'll have to confess to you that when I saw my name alongside such distinguished leaders as Gary Burnison, Korn Ferry, and then Jed York of the 49ers, I developed some anxiety because, I thought, my goodness, how am I alongside such distinguished leaders? And I started thinking about the late comedian George Gobel. Some of you may be old enough to remember George Gobel. He appeared on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson many years ago, and he was following legends Bob Hope and Dean Martin, and I think his comment sort of reflects how I'm feeling right now. See if we can pull this
This is a pretty fast league here.
Oh, this is the A troops are out here
and
tonight.
I'm glad you saved me now, because, when you come on last, did you ever get the feeling, that the world was a tuxedo and you were a pair of brown shoes?
That's kind of how I feel tonight. I feel like the world's a tuxedo on a pair of brown shoes. Over the years, though, one of the things I've learned, and I hope that you've come to this understanding as well, is, we all have a story. And hopefully tonight, some of what I have to say might enrich your life in some small way. So I'm looking forward to this. Much of my understanding of leadership, which grows every day through my experiences, just like yours does, originally came from serving in the military. And being a pilot in the service was certainly a great experience. And so I thought, I'd share a few leadership lessons from being a part of the U-2 spy squadron and share sort of an insider's view of what that airplane was all about. And then share with you some of the leadership lessons that I think made it such a rewarding and fulfilling experience. But before we get there, I think it's worth taking just a second to sort of establish some context, because I think, generally speaking, that we sometimes forget just how far we've come. These images of the Wright brothers back in 1903, just over a century ago, tell us that, we've come a long way in a very short period of time. And you think about this first flight and the distance covered, about 12 seconds in terms of time. All of that could be measured off these days inside the cabin of a 747. And yet it opened the doors really to innovation and technology, and all of that was put on display. And as a result, the world really did change. And what's extraordinary to me is that the aircraft that I'm going to talk about, the U-2, was really developed just over 50 years after those images that you just saw with the Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk. It's a remarkable testament really to the innovation that took place back in the 50s. And of course, the airplane we're flying today is essentially the same sort of basic airplane that was created back in the 1950s. There's been some enhancements, which I'll touch on, but really quite a tribute to those engineers back in the 50s. Well, at the heart of the U-2 story is Kelly Johnson, the leader of what became known as the Skunk Works division of Lockheed. And through a series of twists and turns, Johnson secured a contract with the United States government in the 50s to develop a high-altitude reconnaissance program that ultimately was critical in capturing intelligence during the Cold War. And Johnson's contract called for 6 airplanes initially at a cost of $22.5 million. And over the phase of the U-2, as it became operational, that team at the Skunk Works worked so closely together and were such an efficient organization under Johnson's leadership that they were actually able to come in under budget and ahead of time. And they actually gave the government back money that they didn't need and had enough spare parts to provide some additional airplanes. That's a far cry from what you read about these days. This first flight that you see here on the screen took place in August of 1955, just 8 months after the contract was signed. And Johnson was certainly an exceptional leader and a man whose advice I really liked. He was known to say, be quiet, be quick, and be on time. And that's pretty good advice from any leader. Of course, the original U-2 was made famous initially in May of 1960 after Francis Gary Powers was shot down over Russia. Powers was later returned to the United States in exchange for a Soviet spy. However, the remains of the U-2 he was flying are still on display in a Soviet museum. And then, of course, 2 years later, the U-2 played a key role in the Cuban Missile Crisis. And that certainly put the U-2 on the map in terms of the public awareness. The airplane that Powers flew was about 40% smaller than the U-2 that we fly today. But the basic design is largely the same. You can see Powers' airplane to the left, the C model, and then you can see the R model, also an S model that we fly today, about 40% bigger than Gary's airplane. Again, it's an interesting concept, right, because you don't typically see airplanes with a 105-foot wingspan, but this is the airplane that Johnson came up with. Now, this is a view of the current plane that we fly today, and this airplane was put into service in 1967. And we're still flying it today, and if you've been following the news at all, generally about every 2 years someone talks about retiring the U-2, and then somehow it always falls through. And not long ago, the Air Force actually extended this plan to fly the U-2 through 2023. So there's a lot of talk about unmanned aircraft, but the U-2 is still doing its thing and doing it economically. The airplane is 63 feet long. It sits 16 feet off the ground. Fully loaded for operational missions, the airplane weighs about 40,000 pounds, and it carries just under 3,000 gallons of fuel in the wings. It's flown operationally by one pilot, so you get to fly with your best friend every time. It's powered by one engine, manufactured now by General Electric. When I flew the airplane, Pratt & Whitney supplied the power plant, but that's been changed now with General Electric. And then it produces about 17,000 pounds of thrust at sea level. So it's a very powerful engine. Has a maximum speed of about 410 miles per hour and a range of over 7,000 statute miles. Less than 40 aircraft are in operation today. Fabulous airplane. A little tough to taxi on the ground, but likes to fly, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute. As you can see from this picture, another thing that makes it unusual is it has a tail wheel. And some of you have seen airplanes that have a tail wheel. Typically, you don't see one quite this large. The tail wheel allows you to steer the airplane, but this main gear that's sort of positioned mid-fuselage here, that actually is fixed, so it doesn't turn one way or the other. So it's truly sort of a bicycle type arrangement as opposed to just like a tricycle gear that you would see on a commercial airliner. We also have these small outrigger wheels, or pogos, and we'll talk more about what those do here in just a minute. I always like the motto of the squadron, in God we trust, all others we monitor. Never before has that been such a relevant statement, but the squadron has served our country well for many years in a wide range of missions, not just combat related, but certainly through atmospheric research and a host of other activities. The U-2 Pogos, that's something that I wanted to touch on because it's a unique airplane. I don't know of another airplane where you actually, you take off with 4 wheels and you come back with 2, and that's normal. So you actually land the airplane with half the gear that you took off with. And what I'm talking about are these wheels right here that are called pogos, and those are in place just for the taxi to the runway. And then once you get on the runway and you start your takeoff roll, as the wing begins to produce lift, those wheels fall out. And so that allows you to climb to a higher altitude because you have less weight in the airplane. So a maintenance crew scurries out and picks these up off of the runway and hauls them off so another airplane doesn't run into them. You'll also notice there's a titanium skid right out here on the wingtip. And that's because when you come back and you don't have wheels on the wings, eventually one wingtip will gently touch the runway. That's what the brochure says. And that titanium skid makes certain that you don't damage the wheel. So you can see here in this picture, this pogo that's sitting over here on the left wing. Of course, there's one on the right that we can't see. And then as you add power, that wheel actually falls out onto the runway. And then once you get airborne, it's very clean. You don't have any pogos any longer. Beautiful airplane once it gets airborne. It's a real beast to taxi around, but once you get in the air, it's a Cadillac. The U-2 carries a payload of about 5,000 pounds, which makes it one of the most versatile airborne intelligence platforms in history. For example, the U-2 has about 7 different nose configurations that can be placed on the airplane to carry different types of sensors. So it's very flexible in that regard. It carries different camera systems and signal intelligence. It's a very, very impressive platform for surveillance. This is one of the most common sensors. It's called the ASARS sensor, the Advanced Synthetic Aperture Radar. And the U-2 uses this extensively. We used it extensively during the Gulf War. And it's a side-looking radar that allows you to, for the most part, stay in international airspace and take photographs. And the technology really is extraordinary. Just speaking at an unclassified level, the airplane can take single-digit resolution pictures from a distance in excess of 300 miles. So to put it into perspective, if we were airborne above this building and this airplane, we could get a picture of someone's belt buckle in San Diego. And it wouldn't matter what the weather was doing. It's an extraordinary bit of technology. Well, of course, if you're flying high altitude, you have to wear a full pressure suit. And for many years, the U-2 pilots wore sort of the Gemini space program hand-me-downs. But recent versions have made the suit a little more comfortable than the original style suit. It's interesting, in flying this airplane to different air shows, it seems more people are concerned about this suit than they are about anything related to the U-2. And I'll explain why in just a minute. The suit consists of several layers. These suits cost tens of thousands of dollars to produce, but they're critical to the mission because if you're at altitude and you have decompression, then the suit inflates to keep your body at 30,000 feet, which allows you to stay alive long enough to descend and restart the engine or to glide and get the airplane on the ground. In this case, this pilot's carrying the air conditioning unit, which of course is disconnected before you actually get into the cockpit. It takes about 45 minutes to get into this suit. It's quite the exercise. It takes several people to get situated. And then once you are inside the suit, you put the helmet on and the gloves, and then you begin a process of pre-breathing 100% oxygen. And you do this to get the nitrogen out of your body because altitude-induced decompression sickness is a major concern, especially when you're a single pilot. And most of the places that you fly the U-2, people are wishing the worst for you. And so you want to make certain that your health is good and that you're not subjected to what we commonly call the bends, right? You hear that with scuba divers all the time. But it is an interesting part of the process. And I say that because even the littlest thing becomes a major ordeal. And so you start pre-breathing an hour before your flight even begins. Now, the typical flight in the U-2 is about 12 hours. These flights have been extended over time. At one point, they actually had a refueling capability, which was madness because pilots were having to sit for 12 and 13 hours as it was. Refueling was wholeheartedly disregarded by the pilots. We didn't have a union in those days, but we thought that was a bad idea. 12 hours is plenty. So you sit back, you relax, you pre-breathe this 100% oxygen, and then you start the process. Now, here's where it gets sort of tricky, right? You see this fellow sitting here in the suit, and you say, okay, I get that. So you're going to be flying for 12 hours, so what sort of provisions do we have here to make it through the flight? And there are some creature comforts. So you lock down this faceplate, and once you do that, then you have to keep that seal, the integrity of that seal, good for the, for the entire flight. So once you close that faceplate, you don't get access to your mouth or to your eyes or to your nose for the next 12 hours. And invariably, when I first went into the program, I would close that, and, immediately I have something in my eye, I have something in my nose, I have something. But after a while, you get to the point where you just get real comfortable with it. And I can even remember at times reaching to scratch my nose and hitting the faceplate, not even think, just kind of becomes another layer of skin. You do have the ability to take on some liquids. There's a little food port over on the right side of the space helmet there. And you just insert that in, and you can take liquids throughout the flight because you do get dehydrated as you fly for long periods of time. And there's even this little tricky toothpaste tube here that's full of pureed food. So you can have something to eat while you're flying. And in this case, this is a tube of applesauce, which is a delight when you've been flying for 3 or 4 hours. But there are other options. There is a beef and gravy option. And I will tell you, I learned to only eat things like applesauce and peaches and things like that. This product is sort of like baby food, right? It's because you have to squirt it to get into your mouth. So, but I learned the hard way. I was flying on a training mission one time, and there's a small food heater. It's interesting. We don't have enough wheels to land, but we have a food heater. And I put the tube in the food heater and pushed the button and kind of got busy doing my thing. And after a while, I noticed it said food ready. That's how nice is this? So I took the tube out and I screwed this straw into it, and then I stuck it into the food port and gave it a good squeeze. And of course, you have the gloves on, so you don't really realize just how hot that product really is. So it was scalding hot. And I squirted it, and I just instinctively spewed it out, of course, which meant that for the next 8 hours, I looked at beef and gravy in my windscreen. Never again will I do that. But nonetheless, it is an interesting process, and because you are taking on some of these liquids, fortunately, there is a UCD. The military has an acronym for everything, right? So there's a UCD, which is a urine collection device. It allows you to use the restroom while you're at altitude. And there's actually a provision for female pilots now so that they can also fly the airplane. But that's where it stops. So you want to go low residue, right? You're going to lay off the enchilada combo dinner, that's for sure. So you may be asking yourself, why would anyone do this, right? Well, I can tell you that the stuff I'm sharing with you is not in the brochure. It's not a part of the recruiting deal. You learn about that later after you get into the program. But once you're accepted into the program, then you have an opportunity to go out and go through the interview process. And the interview process is a very grueling process. You fly out to Beale Air Force Base, which you see in this photograph, and the first thing you do is you go through an interview with a number of senior staff. Obviously, if you're flying a single-seat airplane, they want to make sure that you're stable and that you're not going to do anything too crazy. So they have you interview with lots of different folks. And if you pass that part of the process, then they actually put you in the suit. Because a lot of folks just are claustrophobic, and they can't handle the confinement of being in that suit. So a lot of good pilots wash out of the interview process just because they get uncomfortable with the suit as soon as they close the lid. I know when I went out for my interview, I've never had that sort of a problem before, and I got into the suit, and they said, well, lay down here on this recliner, and we'll be back in a bit. And so I was sort of chilling out there, and later an airman came back to get me because that part of the interview was over. He said, well, you dozed off for a couple of hours. And I said, well, does that mean I pass? And he said, oh, yeah, that's good. So somehow or another, that worked out. And my wife's never appreciated my sleeping capabilities, but apparently it worked out in the U2. I could sleep just about anywhere. But if you pass those tests, then what you get to do is you get 3 rides in this B model. And it's a B model because they've taken a normal cockpit and then they've added this seat right here for an instructor pilot. There are only 2 of these airplanes, and it's strictly for training. But you have to learn how to fly the airplane with someone, right? So you go through this interview process, and you get 3 rides, and really the purpose for the 3 rides is to determine whether or not you have an aptitude to land the airplane, because it is the hardest airplane to land of any airplane in the inventory. And it's because of this problem. You don't have any wheels out on the wings, and now you're kind of trying to balance yourself like you would on a unicycle. Well, to say that the landings are sporty is an understatement. And you get the hang of it over time, and you start to perfect it. But in the beginning, the interview process is painful for the instructor pilots. And I think we have a little bit of footage here to give you a sense of how rough it can be. So the idea here is to go straight down the runway as opposed to left towards the grass. In this case, you have a little bit of power to help save you. That's kind of a view from the cockpit of how tight it is and what the airplane looks like. But if you look at some of these images, you can think about the airplane and the fact that that's probably not going to get you a second interview, right? They say that the U-2 has been nicknamed the Dragon Lady, and it's better to dance with the lady than wrestle with the dragon. Well, here's some wrestling going on as you depart the runway and then ground loop. It's not going to look good on a resume, that's for certain. And if you think it looks a little sporty from here, you can imagine what it's like for the instructor pilot who has to sit there and observe this experienced pilot go through the process of trying to learn how to land this thing. Remember, in order to get into the interview process, you have to have more than 1,000 hours of aircraft commander time. So these aren't new pilots. These are experienced pilots, but it can be very humbling, to say the least. Generally, when you're facing the direction you were coming in, that's a bad thing. That's not well accepted. And of course, here you can see a stall just above the ground. This looks a little scary here. I wouldn't necessarily agree. The instructor showing his dislike of that approach. And then here, almost dragging this left wingtip is scary enough. And there's a whole archive of these. We could go on and on, but you get the idea that it's a pretty brutal process. The U-2 is a very, that one's not gonna do the airframe much good. I wouldn't want to fly it the next day. Here's a pogo that was actually stuck. It dropped late in the flight, and of course you don't want to have this on your. This one had no main gear, had to land on the belly. And here's one of the older B models that's taking a little off-road experience as they plunge into the grass, into a cloud of smoke. About 40% of the folks that are interviewed actually get through this process. So it's a weeding out process that takes some time. But if you are accepted in the program, of course, it's a great thrill. And you head out to Beale Air Force Base, and you train for several months out there in how to land the plane and then the systems and so on. I remember when I first was accepted in the program, what a thrill it was, and then to actually solo the airplane and really sort of become a part of the fraternity, right? When you solo the airplane, that was very thrilling for me. I think there's that old line about being excited about something. And you call your wife and say, wow, I soloed the U-2. Did you ever in your wildest dreams see me as a U-2 pilot? And the wife says, no, actually, I've never seen you in any of my wildest dreams. That's kind of the way it worked in my house. It was unimpressive. It's a very tight squeeze when you get the pressure suit on to get into the cockpit. They actually call it integration. Which is a pretty good word because it takes 2 or 3 people to get you into the airplane and get you strapped in properly. It's a process. It doesn't happen. It's one of the only airplanes that I've ever been involved with where the canopy is actually closed by someone other than the pilot. And I always wondered about that, but having been in the program, now I know why, because most pilots wouldn't close the canopy if they knew what they were going to have to go do, right? So that somebody has to close it for you to remind you that you've got to go make this happen. You sit in an ejection seat, and this ejection seat has been built for high altitude ejection. And so when you're flying up above 70,000 feet, if for some reason you had to eject, this sequence is really quite interesting. What happens is that you actually pull this D-ring that's right here between your legs, and these canopy thrusters that are on both sides of the canopy take the canopy off, and then this entire seat rides up the rail and out of the airplane. So you actually come out with the seat, and that's because there's oxygen in the base of the seat that allows you to stay alive at high altitude. But here's where the fun starts. You actually free fall from 70,000 plus feet to about 14,500 feet. And then when that happens, you get seat-man separation. So you actually are kicked out of the seat, and then you sort of come to earth like a normal parachutist would. But that's a pretty long free fall, right? And I always wondered about that. I asked one of the airmen one time, I said, well, what happens if the automatic feature doesn't work, right? Because you don't really know. I mean, it's time and you're falling and, you know, and he said, well, you just wait until you can see the trees. That always bothered me. That always bothered me. I never liked that. So the better alternative is to figure out a way to glide someplace and land, right? It always seemed like a better approach. But anyway, that's the U-2 ejection seat. The avionics have improved a lot in this airplane over the years. Back when I was flying, this is sort of what the cockpit looked like. We had this drift sight here in the center of the avionics panel that would allow you, like a periscope, to look down underneath the airplane and highly magnified, see what activity might be going on underneath the airplane. And you could actually swivel that almost horizon to horizon. But over the years, they've made a lot of nice enhancements, and here you see what the cockpit looks like today. It's a glass cockpit with all of the creature comforts and state-of-the-art equipment. Kelly Johnson understood in those days that you don't want to add weight if you don't have to, because for every pound you add to the weight of the airplane, you lose 1 foot of altitude in the climb. And in this airplane, unlike a commercial airliner where you take off and then you level off, in this airplane you never level off. You take off and you climb the entire time, right? Because altitude is your friend. And so Kelly Johnson felt that adding, creature comforts was something that we could avoid to keep the weight down, hence the wheels that fall off. Every mission has a mobile officer who's a backup pilot, and really the purpose here is for the mobile to drive behind you and sort of be your ears and eyes and sort of kind of take in all that's happening, because when you're in that pressure suit, you don't have great visibility. And since the landing is the hardest part of the mission, when you're coming back, having sat in a cabin at 30,000 feet with this suit on, you really want to make certain that you're calibrated properly. And so having this officer in a car riding alongside the airplane is really helpful, because typically what they'll do is they'll say, oh, well, there's 10 feet at the threshold, meaning that's how high the airplane is as it comes across the threshold. And then they'll give calls like 8 feet, 6 feet, 4 feet, 2 feet. And if you're flying a good mission and a good landing, you'll hear a call like there's 2 feet, 2 feet, 2 feet, 1 foot, 6 inches, and then you touch down. What you don't want to hear is there's 10 at the T, 8, 6, 5, 4, 3, right? That's what you don't want to hear. And so it's quite a bit of fun. Back when I was in the program, we drove souped-up Mustangs. Now they drive GTOs, and here they go. They speed right out onto the runway, right behind the airplane, and the mobile officer is talking to the pilot and saying, okay, you got the rudder, you're going straight, and giving those distance calls. And as the airplane slows down, then the crew comes out, puts the pogo wheels back in, and then you taxi back to the hangar. It's an interesting mission. It's not your run-of-the-mill Air Force airplane, that's for sure. Lightweight, the U-2 has tremendous performance. The takeoff roll is about 200 feet. And then once you actually leave the ground, you can just keep the yoke coming back, and literally the sky gets full of the windscreen, and away you go. And you just climb all the way up to your operational altitude. It's a great airplane once you get off the ground. Taxiing around is a little bit complicated. So in this particular video, you see the takeoff roll. You don't have to pull the yoke back much. The airplane's already positioned like it wants to take off, and as soon as it leaves the ground, the pogos drop out, and you just keep the nose coming up, up, up. And typically about 15,000 feet per minute. So you can cross, lightweight, you can cross the end of the runway at about 10,000 feet. So it really gets up and goes. It's even better than flying out of John Wayne, right, with that noise reduction. You can see here's a photograph, sort of self-portrait, and you can see the runway is actually right back here. A lot of fun, that's for sure. Once you get up to altitude, this airplane is just it's just a dream. And you see things that obviously it's difficult for a picture to convey, but this gives you some sense of just the beauty that you see at altitude. It's very peaceful, as long as the engine's running. It's very peaceful. You see the curvature of the earth. This airplane, because it's a subsonic airplane, you have to watch the airspeed very, very carefully, because the air is very thin up at high altitude. And so if you aren't paying close attention, and if the autopilot's not paying close attention, you can get yourself into trouble. So if you're flying a couple of knots fast, you have to really be careful, because you can overspeed the airplane and then the wings come off. If you're not paying attention and you're 2 or 3 knots slow, the airplane will start shaking because it's running out of airspeed, and it'll stall and fall out of the sky. And so if the autopilot's working, it makes for a pretty comfortable day. But if the autopilot's not working and you have to hand fly it, it's a real challenge, because you fly kind of in the burble with the yoke shaking constantly between overspeed and stall. Makes for a long day. They don't have that in the brochure either, by the way, but you learn about that. This pod here carries surveillance equipment. All of the fuel is actually carried in the wings themselves. Again, some great shots here taken over Lake Tahoe. Really spectacular. And then, of course, every U-2 pilot, has one of these self-portraits, I love me picture in their garage or in their study or whatever. You ask, well, what do you do for 10 hours? Well, you take pictures of yourself. That's part of what you do there. But the best part, of course, is at the end of the day, right? Because you've done something meaningful, and you turn the airplane and head home. And this airplane, because it's so clean, it doesn't want to come down. It likes to stay at altitude. And so, unlike any other airplane that I've ever been exposed to, the first step in the descent checklist is you put the gear down. Even though you're at 70,000 feet and you're a long ways from home. In a commercial airliner, you wait until you get close to the runway and then you put the gear down. But in this airplane, you actually have to put the gear down first, then the speed brakes, and then you start your descent. It takes about an hour or so to get back to an altitude where you can actually fly a traffic pattern. Very, very interesting mission, great squadron, and very effective organization. And that's really what I want to leave you with today, are some takeaways, because in the years since I flew the airplane, it's given me a chance to think back to the leadership, the principles, the things that were important to our squadron mates, and to sort of apply those to business. And I'm hoping that in just a few minutes that we have here, some of these takeaways might be of some value to you. So the first one that I want to share with you as a takeaway is this idea of surrendering your ego and embracing the truth. A little humility goes a long way for leaders. And I know when I first came into the program, I was so excited to be a U-2 pilot, and then I found out when I got into the squadron that everybody's a U-2 pilot. And so there's really no point in bragging about it. I mean, they've all been through the same process. But even more important than that, one of the things that you discover is this idea of the dragon lady, right? So there's sort of a potential on every flight for something to go wrong. And so you sort of have to become humble and really follow the checklist and do the things by the letter so that you don't become a victim in the process. And I think that's important for business as well. Leaders need to have a strain of humility, do they not? And unfortunately, in business today, too often we have leaders with egos that are out of control. And it has a dramatic impact on the success of the organization. I always liked the great British historian Arnold Toynbee, and I quote him in some of my writing. But one of Toynbee's famous quotes that I think is applicable here is he says, nothing fails like success. And isn't that true? I mean, when you think that your organization is hitting on all cylinders, when you think your organization is at its summit, right, the zenith, you're as good as it can be, frankly, that's when you're your most vulnerable. Because that sort of prideful thinking can get you into real trouble. And so surrendering your ego and embracing the truth is an important takeaway. The second thing, obviously, in the U2 business was preserving the culture, right? I mean, you had this long history of really extraordinary success in the squadron and meaningful missions and making a contribution. Well, even if you're starting an organization, I think it's super important to pay attention to the culture that you're creating. What are you cultivating in your people? And there are all sorts of ways to perpetuate that culture. Part of it is just talking about it a lot. It becomes a part of the mythology of your company, right? So you onboard people into your company, you're talking about the history. You're talking about all the great things that have happened. You're talking about personalities that have made the organization what it is today. Too often when you go to onboarding meetings, and Linda and I were talking about this in the podcast, you go and you sit down and, an HR professional reads from a manual about the 20 ways you can get fired, right? And I understand that compliance is a part of it, but really we ought to start by talking about what is it about this culture that makes it such a great place. At the end of the day, and I'm on record as saying this, and you'll see it in Built to Serve, I think the future of business is less about price and profit, as important as those are. And it's more about choice and culture. And I hope that more and more leaders will take us up on that. The third thing is remaining faithful to your values. Life's too short to work in an organization where your values are constantly being compromised. And so as an organizational leader, I think it's important to state what those values are, because if you can get people whose values, their personal values, are aligned with the organizational values, then great things can happen. I mean, the military is a classic example of that, right? People do extraordinary things. They don't do it for the pay. Trust me, when I was flying the U2, I got an extra $100 a month. It wasn't for the pay. But it's a sense of doing something that's noble and knowing that the organization is committed to doing what is right. And I'd like to see more of our organizations talk about their values and their alignment. The fourth thing is sort of a no-brainer with Kelly Johnson, right, in the history of the U2, and that's unleash the imagination and lift the performance of your team. Being a great leader involves letting go and letting your team members realize their potential along the way. And that's one of the things that Kelly Johnson, I think, it's one of his legacies. The airplanes that were produced by the Skunk Works team couldn't have been produced without this type of an attitude as a leader. So you're setting a direction, and then you sort of get out of the way and let people do what they're capable of doing. And it's a great lesson for all of us. Certainly Johnson was a thought leader, but he inspired the best in his team. And I think every organization today needs a thought leader. They need someone who's thinking about the future. Otherwise, you're going to become irrelevant, and you don't want that to happen. Kelly Johnson certainly modeled that for us. I've sat in a lot of meetings in my career where somebody would say, we need more sales, right? We need more sales, we need more sales. And I'd be thinking to the back of my mind, I get that, but what we really need to do is improve our competitive advantage, right? I mean, isn't that really the issue? And that comes back to this takeaway here. If we thought a little more about innovation and, thought a little more about creating competitive advantage, more than likely our sales would be better. But too often we like to focus on just the number as if it were unique into itself. And this is really one that I think is so important, and frankly, Built to Serve is as much about this as it is anything. And that's this idea of never stop talking about a higher purpose. Now in the U2, we were fortunate, right? Because we had a patch that we wore on our sleeve. It reminded us about it every time we went to fly. And if you've lived abroad or you've been in a hostile situation before, as some of you that have served in the military have experienced, you know that flag is pretty important. And it stands for freedom, and it stands for our way of life. And as screwed up as so much of our world is today, if you travel or if you're in hostile areas, it's a beacon. It's a beacon of light. It's a sense of perspective. And having that purpose is so critical. It lifts the organization to a different height. I love what Bill George talked about with Medtronic, right? Bringing patients who are alive because of the the heart transplant equipment that Medtronic was producing and manufacturing, bringing them to the assembly line and letting those hardworking, talented team members actually look eyeball to eyeball with people who were alive because of what they were doing. And it's interesting in Bill's work there, because when consultants went back into the assembly line and asked people working on the line, what's your job? Many of them said, I save lives. Not, I put this widget into that widget. That's very powerful, is it not? When I was at Lubbock Christian University, I went there to play baseball. And my coach was Larry Hayes. And Larry Hayes is an extraordinary coach. He's since retired. He's in the NCAA Hall of Fame, NAIA Hall of Fame. He's won more than 1,500 games. One of the fourth most winningest coach in the history of college baseball. But when Larry was at Lubbock Christian University, he understood that the higher purpose at Lubbock Christian University was changing lives and really helping students understand their role as it related to Christianity and citizenship and building character. Well, I can assure you, Larry wanted to win baseball games as much as anybody, but he understood what the higher purpose was. I was pitching against Texas A&M one time in the freshman year, and it was under the lights, 9-inning game, probably the biggest game I'd ever pitched in my young college career, and I walked the first batter on 4 straight pitches, and I walked the second batter on 4 straight pitches. Now, by the way, walking batters is a bad thing, right? You all know that, right? So I walked the third batter on 5 pitches. He hit one of my fastballs over the fence, but it was foul. And Larry Hayes came out of the dugout, and he jogs out to the mound, and he says, hey, Dan, what's the problem? And I said, I think I'm nervous. He said, you're nervous? Think about me. I got you pitching for me. He said, look, we got people on full scholarship behind you here. They can pitch and catch. Why don't you just let them hit it, right? I mean, just let them hit it. Let's get on with it. Can you do that? I said, I can do it. So he trotted back to the dugout, and the fourth hitter for Texas A&M that year was batting like 750. At least that's the way I like to remember it. And I threw him my best fastball, and he hit a grand slam home run over the center field fence. This is a true story. And Larry Hayes came back out of the dugout, and he was smiling. And he's smiling, and he said, Dan, I didn't expect you to let him hit it quite that far. But the point of the whole story was that Hayes understood what the higher purpose was about, right? It didn't matter what my earned run average was going to be at the end of the year. What was important was using the experience in order to advance the cause, the higher purpose of the university. That's what Larry Hayes did. What a great mentor, right? What a great mentor. The 6th thing is accepting responsibility. And you'd think maybe we wouldn't have to talk about this, but every time I read the Wall Street Journal, I wonder. I don't understand it. I really don't. I was talking with the dean earlier about it. You know, you can delegate authority, but you can never delegate responsibility. And yet, every week in the Wall Street Journal, you read about some senior leader that says, well, I didn't know they were doing that in accounting, right? Well, you're responsible, right? You're paid to know what they're doing in accounting. And I don't understand it because we get it when it comes to sports, right? I mean, if the team is losing, who gets fired? The coach. Well, the coach didn't throw the interception. The coach didn't fumble, right? The coach didn't miss the tackle. The coach is on sidelines. Why would you fire the coach? You fire the coach because the coach is responsible to make certain that you don't fumble the ball and throw the interception and miss the tackle. And that's just the price of admission of leadership. But far too often, we miss that. And it's unfortunate that we do, because I think from a leadership perspective, we'd be so much better if people understood this concept. I've had store directors in the supermarket business say to me when I've talked about this, they'll say, well, Dan, that's kind of a high bar, isn't it? I mean, what if I'm on vacation? What if I'm in Florida, right? Or I'm not at the store 24 hours a day. And my response is, you're even more responsible, right? Because if you understand what I'm talking about here, then you won't hire just a warm body. You'll go to great lengths to make sure that you put someone in there that would do what you would do if you were there. That's just the way it has to work. And then this one is an important one as well. Acknowledge the fact that no job is unimportant. Isn't that true? You know, when I was flying the U-2, it was so humbling to realize there were more than 100 support folks to make sure that every one of those flights went off without a hitch. More than 100. And it's true in the supermarket business too. You know, I look at these sackers, these kids that are bagging groceries, you know, and they're spending more time with the customers than I am. It's a critical job. And yet too often we sort of marginalize what they're doing. I pulled into a parking lot one time and I saw a young sacker, he's 16 years old. And he was finishing up changing a flat tire for one of our customers. Now, we didn't have anything in a training manual that says we change flat tires, right? But he was finishing, and she was trying to give him some money. And I could tell from his body language he wasn't going to accept the money, which was our policy. But when he went back into the store, I ran in there, I took a gift card. I wanted to acknowledge what I'd seen and thank him for it, right? And I found him in the back room. He was cleaning up because he had kind of gotten dirty in the tire change. And I said, just out of curiosity, I said, I saw what you did. I said, why did you do that? Tell me what you were thinking about. And this 16-year-old kid, sacking groceries, said, you know, you guys are always talking about serving and enriching the lives of others. This lady was in trouble and needed help, and so I helped her. No big deal. I helped her. 16 years old. Now, he went on to say, I hope she gets home okay, because I've never changed a flat tire before. There's a little trade-off there on a general liability claim, but you got to appreciate the fact that, you know, no job is unimportant, right? I think it's a very, very important point to be made. And then number 8 here is place integrity where it can't be compromised. The U-2 is synonymous with doing this, right? I mean, the U-2 has used imagery to hold people's claims in the light of day so that people understand what's really happening. But you really have to create an environment where telling the truth is okay, even when the truth is not too convenient. And that's the responsibility of the leadership, to set that tone from the very beginning. The reality is that you have to model that behavior every day because people are watching you as a leader every single day, whether you think they are or not. You may not think you're in training. Trust me, you're in training. You are teaching behavior every day. I love what Craig Zablocki said many years ago. He came to our organization. He said, if you want to be a leader, I can make you a great leader if you just follow this one thing, just this one thing. And he asked everybody to make an okay sign like this. And he stood up at the front. He said, okay, everybody got their okay sign. Now I want you to place it on your chin. And 90% of the room did exactly what I'm doing here. He said, I asked you to put it on your chin. But we were all doing this. And it was a great leadership lesson as it relates to this point, right? People follow your actions more than your words. If you didn't know anything more than that as a leader, you'd be pretty good. You'd be actually a standout in today's society. And then this one is crucial as well, right? Just because you're focusing on people and you're putting people first doesn't mean you get a pass on performance. Not at all. And of course, in the U-2, execution was critical, right? If you didn't execute properly, you either ended up dead or you created some international incident or who knows what. But in our organizations, it's critical that we focus on execution as well. Great execution in today's marketplace means that you have to sort of surrender your right to occasional mediocrity. You just can't get away with that anymore. And so while a lot of people lament the fact that they have competition, I relish the fact because it makes us better. It makes us better. And the bar raises and raises and raises. And then the final thing is to have some fun. Whatever happened to fun? Good grief, we spend a lot of time working but we don't always have a good time. And there's nothing wrong with having a good time. In fact, having a good time, having fun, relieves stress, creates a more healthy workforce, gives people some enjoyment. I love what Dr. Kenneth Cooper said. You know, he said, we should all desire to live a long and active life followed by an exceedingly short death. Isn't that true? And, you know, one of my cohorts in the audience tonight, Kelly, is a great reminder of this. You know, handball and exercise and yoga and always got a big smile. He lives it. He personifies it. And I would like to think that as much time as we spend working, that perhaps we might have a little fun along the way as well. So I thank you for allowing me the opportunity to share some of these takeaways with you and to talk about the U2. I wish you all continued success in your endeavors. Thank you very much.